Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reacting to
American food mapped.
Yes. Super processed, bland food, which is often sold at drive-thrus or these giant superstores. And sure, America has this culture, if you want to call it that. But I think this does a disservice to a cuisine that is way more diverse and distinctive than most people give it credit for. Because a lot of people don't realize that American food is truly more like this.
Eastern tribe, what is that? Great Plains tribes, Tex-Mex,
This video is going to be about the diverse regional and ethnic cuisines of this country.
Ooh.
And maybe why it might be one of the most underrated cuisines in the world. So today we're going to dig into why American food is way better and more diverse than you might think it is.
I think underrated is a fair term to use because I do feel it gets a lot of negative rep because of the fast food, to be fair. Like when you think of American food, you wouldn't think of soul food. And to be fair, before coming, I didn't know what soul food was. You know, American food, you always think burgers, hot dogs, stuff like that.
The best place to start is with the first people who lived here, Native American cuisines. Now, a lot of people have this idea that Native Americans were just hunters and gatherers, and that they ate whatever they hunted that day. But there are a lot of dishes that Native people cultivated and prepared that we still eat today.
that.
In the tribes of Eastern America alone, corn was widely used as a staple food. Tribes in this part of the continent created dishes like Johnny cakes, succotash, and hush puppies out of corn. In fact, Native tribes
Never tried none of them.
Oh, I've tried
like the Wabanaki even used corn to make baby formula, way before the first official invention of it in the West. But probably the most consequential food natives created was cornbread, which has a crazy story that we'll get to in a bit. In the Great Plains of America, tribes here were discovered making this thing called pemmican, a dried mix of meat, usually bison or deer, along with different kinds of berries. Pemmican is still eaten in a lot of indigenous communities across America today, and some Native people even sell it commercially. Definitely something I want to try when I'm back in the US. To the west, in the Navajo Nation, is another dish, fry bread. This is basically a deep-fried flatbread that has an uncomfortable history. The Navajo for centuries...
Like, it's kind of like pita bread almost.
Yeah.
Pita bread, but not fried.
I was looking at like fried bread, like different people how they do it, and this came up and I saw this.
Have lived in modern-day Arizona. As more European Americans moved into this area, the Navajo people were forced by the United States government to leave their home. This was decades of backs and forths, but eventually in 1863, U.S. military leaders stormed the Navajo territory and burned whatever they could. This scorched earth tactic quickly starved the Navajo out of their land and forced them to surrender to the will of the United States government. These people were subsequently assigned to walk 300 miles from their home to internment at Bosque Redondo, New Mexico. This was called the Long Walk.
That's crazy, the history.
To keep the Navajo from starving, the U.S. government made this cheap deep-fried bread to feed them, which eventually became fried bread. To this day, fried bread is made and eaten by Native Americans across the country. Many indigenous communities
So it's
have
not
adopted...
really their foods, it's foods that they were given while they're taking this long walk.
Seems like
That's so sad.
Seems like the food they were given, but they kind of adopted it because that's kind of what they got used to eating, I guess.
Wow.
And taken ownership of this dish. It's become a complicated symbol of both colonialism and resilience. Up north in Alaska is a more fun addition to indigenous dishes, Alaskan ice cream, or akta. This is a dessert very much like ice cream that was created by Alaskan Inuits using whipped fat of mooses or walruses with berries from the region. It's a really interesting looking tradition, and I would love to try it in Alaska someday. These Native American foods are really important because they have a lot more influence on American cuisine than you might think. Let's start with an iconic ethnic cuisine in the South, soul food. Now, soul food originates from one of the most atrocious chapters of American history, slavery. But like fried bread, it's become a very important symbol of resilience. The modern flavors of soul food are a mix of cuisines from West and Central Africa, Europe, and Native Americans. For example, cornbread and grits are originally from native cuisines. Cornbread actually has a really weird story. Europeans discovered natives in the New World using corn in a bunch of different ways, including mixing cornmeal into bread. Eventually, the Europeans who landed and settled on this continent wanted cheap workers to cultivate and farm this land. So they went to Africa and started the Atlantic slave trade. these Europeans who were moving between the New World and West Africa brought cornbread with them, and West Africans who were being introduced to this new staple quickly adopted it, especially in Senegal and the Gambia. The Senegambians even created their own version of cornbread called kush, not a drug. However, people from this region would be later taken to the United States as slaves, and with them, they brought their culture of making cornbread, which was originally from the land that they were being brought to. So cornbread has like this hauntingly poetic tale of coming full circle. Slaves in the southern states were normally fed leftovers or parts of animals that white people didn't want to eat, hence dishes like pig feet. And because slaves were also cooks for plantation owners, their style of cooking with African and indigenous influence ultimately created a unique cuisine within the southern states. Black people actually played a huge part in translating a lot of Native American foods into some of the most iconic dishes in the country. Soul food is so influential, it bleeds into a lot of sub-cuisines in America, sometimes making it hard to distinguish one cuisine from another. Cajun food, for example, often shares the room with soul food, but comes from a notably different place, Canada. Well, it wasn't Canada yet, but France. This region is called Acadia. To this day, it's still a unique cultural bubble in Canada. Despite not being in Quebec, French cuisine plays a big role here. However, a lot of French people in Acadia were deported by the British in the 1700s, many of them ending up in Louisiana, which at this point was still part of France. The problem was that Louisiana's climate is very different from Nova Scotia, meaning that Acadians couldn't make their food in the way they originally did. Instead, they adapted their cuisine with native traditions and eventually soul food. One of the most unique aspects of Cajun food is the seasoning, which often uses stuff like thyme, parsley, and cayenne pepper. Now let's move up to New England, which has a cuisine that's...
Yeah, to me Cajun food is like mostly is about it's spicy, right? That's why I kind of associate it.
Been mixed by British pilgrims and native tribes. This is a part of the country where natives taught European settlers how to grow stuff like squash, corn, and pumpkin.
Clams.
Also, seafood is a huge part of the cuisine.
Yeah, for me, clams is like, if I say New England food, the first thing that pops to mind is clams.
Here, from crab cakes, lobster rolls, to New England clam chowder. Another really important thing to note is the American Diner, an iconic institution of American food. But what's most special about New England is that this region is where Plymouth is, the town that hosted the first Thanksgiving meal between the Wampanoag and Pilgrims. A meal that included wild turkey, a key ingredient to one of the most iconic culinary traditions in America. Next up is the Midwest, the agricultural heart of America. There are a ton of states in this region, each with their own specific dishes and styles of cooking. However, it's also known as one of the biggest laughingstocks in the US when it comes to food. I think this region is actually where a lot of the bad stereotypes of American food comes from. After all, the Midwest is home to Lutheran sushi, Cincinnati chili, toasted ravioli, fried cheese...
Yo, toasted ravioli is no joke. We eat that shit in Lithuania. Fire.
Curries, cookie salad, yes, it's real. Watergate salad, a salad of marshmallows and pineapples, and this thing called a hot dish. It's the Midwest. At least they have...
The last dish, I ain't gonna lie, looked really good actually to me.
Potatoes, the meat.
It looked really good.
Cracker Barrel. Also, yeah, I do think Chicago is an amazing food city, but I haven't had a Chicago pizza or Chicago hot dog that's made me wanting more. Speaking of bad stereotypes, this next cuisine suffers from some misconceptions, I think. A lot of people associate Tex-Mex as a bad American copy of Mexican food, but that's Taco Bell. Instead, Tex-Mex actually has a long history dating back to the Tejanos, Spanish descendants who have lived and mixed with the native people in Texas and Mexico for centuries. Now, it's important to know that Texas was originally a part of Mexico that was basically taken by the US, and it was even its own country for like 10 years.
I remember the Alamo.
So this state is a unique cultural bubble within the US that sometimes makes it more similar to northern Mexico, especially with its food. Tex-Mex does have some differences from Mexican cuisine, including using shredded cheese and tortillas made from flour instead of corn. Texas is also the home of nachos, which is a huge snack within the US. Moving on to the West Coast is a range
So nachos is not Mexican. Interesting.
of different cuisines, including California and the Pacific Northwest. Unlike the rest of America, the cuisine of the West Coast is much younger
What
and
do you
is
think?
still sort of
Oh, I know. I was like, what do you think for the West Coast foods? I don't have no idea. West Coast.
West Coast foods.
I don't think of food in West Coast.
Salmon and like I feel like
That's more Alaska.
Washington State, I feel like they have salmon too. It's probably it's by the water. It's probably gonna be fish. A lot of fish.
I don't know if it's safe to eat fish coming from the Pacific.
I don't know, but yeah. I mean, honestly, when I think of food like in California, I feel like all the hippie like kale, that type of shit.
Maybe salad.
Yeah, but like a legit like food option. Nothing really comes to mind.
Defined today. One of the biggest things to note about food in the West Coast is that this region is the biggest pioneer of fusion cuisine in America. In Portland especially, food trucks have produced all kinds of mixtures of cuisines, including Korean tacos and Japanese-style hot dogs.
Okay.
In California, a huge wave of immigrants from China gave birth to American Chinese food, which is a uniquely American ethnic cuisine. A topic I've already covered in a whole other video. And moving even further west to the middle of the Pacific Ocean is...
He didn't touch basically on any of the foods because there isn't any. That's why we couldn't come up with any. Fused food, I guess, makes sense, the fusion, because there's a lot of Asian immigrant population there, so it does make sense, I guess.
Hawaii. Throughout the centuries, all kinds of people have gravitated towards these islands.
Hawaiian food looks
from
so
the name
good.
Hawaiians, which take their food from Polynesia.
What is Hawaiian food? What do you think?
Like poke bowl.
That's Hawaiian?
Yeah.
Asian traditions, to Christian missionaries bringing New England food to these islands, to Asian immigrants from Japan, China, and the Philippines bringing their own cuisines. Like California, people from all over the world have created...
To me, Hawaiian, I think pineapple. Because Hawaiian pizza.
It's some fusion dishes that are unique to Hawaii, including spam musubi and lokomoko. But Hawaii also has a complicated history with its food too. In particular, pineapple and sugar, industries that white Americans have mostly taken away from Hawaiians. But recently, Hawaiians have been putting more effort into pushing their cuisine out to the rest of the country and the world. Finally, let's move on to my hometown, New York City. Despite being a city, New York has its own regional food traditions. From New York pizza to American halal food, in the past few centuries, New York has become one of the most consequential cities in the world, a place where people from everywhere have converged. This city has often been a gateway into America for a lot of Europeans.
What is missing? It used to show, this South and then this South Florida where they have Caribbean food.
Honestly, I feel like the video is misstyled. It's not American food map, it's American food history.
Oh yeah.
Because I feel like I got more history of the food, like how it came to be, than I actually got the food.
Show me the meat.
Yeah, like I felt like there should be more food. Like he said, Cajun food. Like show me more about the Cajun food. Like
he didn't show like the ribs, the briskets.
Right. I feel like after a while, if for somebody who's never seen American food, if they watch this, they wouldn't get what American food is still. Now, American history, maybe, because I feel like he went into history pretty well, explain a little history behind each of the sections, so that's cool, but I just feel like the title should be different.
Africans and Asians. These immigrants, many of whom settled in the city, would sell what they had back home, their food. This is why New York is the birthplace of so many ethnic cuisines, including Italian-American food and Jewish-American food. This has given birth to some of my favorite dishes in the world, from chicken parmesan, New York pizza, New York bagels, and New York cheesecake. Yeah, we like to name a lot of foods after New York. Some other iconic American dishes from here are Eggs Benedict, hot dogs, and Manhattan clam chowder. So you can see that a lot of dishes
Manhattan clam chowder, I never heard of that one.
Dishes are from New York, each with their own very dense histories. There is so much to talk about food in New York that it deserves its own video, or even a series of videos. Not many other cities in the world have a diverse range of food as this city does, and it's a perfect summary of American cuisine. It's a cuisine that is beyond cheeseburgers and Wonder Bread, unless you...
So I feel like the idea of what American cuisine is basically the immigrants, they took food from their home, transformed it a little bit, made an American cuisine, which I feel like those countries would argue that it's their food.
It's no longer their food.
I feel like they would still argue.
I feel like because it's not authentically made to the way that the country has made it. So therefore, the food is transformed.
I don't know. But, yeah, the video itself is well done. Nothing against the video. It's just the title. Not exactly what I was expecting going in the video.
Okay. Guys, of course, let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord. And as always, share as much kindness as possible.